A message arrived at exactly midnight Earth Standard Time. And it came not as a request, but as a command. Ambassador Yellen Vasquez stood in the Great Hall of the United Terran Assembly, her dark eyes fixed on the holographic projection that filled the center of the room. Like a storm cloud made of light, 12 alien figures stared down at her, each one representing a species that had ruled the stars for longer than humanity had existed as a species. The tallest among them was High Lord Cathvoran of the Dominion, a creature that looked like someone had carved a nightmare from obsidian and given it cold amber eyes. His voice echoed through this chamber like thunder rolling across an empty plain. Humanity has 30 standard cycles to comply with the following terms, he announced, and his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. You will surrender all 17 of your colony worlds to Concordat administration. You will dismantle your fleet down to the last shuttle, and you will accept protectorate status under the guidance of the Galactic Lords. Murmurs rippled through the assembled human delegates, but Vasquez raised her hand for silence. She had been an ambassador for 30 years, and she had learned that panic was a luxury that diplomats could never afford. May I ask what crime humanity has committed to warrant such terms? She asked, keeping her voice steady and calm. Cathvoran, as amber eyes narrowed, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his alien features. You have been uplifting primitive species without Concordat approval, he said. The Cathari, the Voss, and the creatures you call the Dreamers. You have given them technology and knowledge that they did not earn, and you have done so without seeking permission from those who have the right to grant it. Vasquez felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. The Cathari had been dying when humanity found them, their world poisoned by a natural disaster that they lacked the science to survive. The Voss had been hunted to near extinction by raiders who saw them as nothing more than sport. And the Dreamers, those gentle telepathic beings who communicated through shared visions, they had been enslaved by a Concordat client species for 3,000 years before human traders discovered them and helped them escape. We saved lives, Vasquez said simply. You disrupted the natural order. Cathvoran replied, and his voice had grown colder now, sharp as a blade made of ice. The strong guide the weak, and the old guide the young. This is how it has always been. This is how it must remain. Another of the lords spoke then, a being that resembled a cluster of floating crystals arranged in a vaguely humanoid shape. You breed too fast, the crystal being observed. In 3 centuries, you have spread across 17 worlds. In 3 more, you would have 100. You think too dangerously. Your scientists ask questions that should not be asked. Your philosophers imagine futures that should not be imagined. Cathvoran nodded slowly. You refuse to know your place, he concluded. And so we must teach it to you. You have 30 cycles. Use them wisely. The hologram flickered and died, leaving the assembly hall in darkness, broken only by the soft glow of emergency lighting. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Vasquez turned to face her fellow humans, and her expression had changed from diplomatic neutrality to something harder and more determined. Call a closed session, she said quietly. Full security protocols, no recordings, no external communications. The delegates exchanged glances, but they did as she asked. When the doors had sealed and the jamming fields had activated, Vasquez walked to the center of the room and stood where the hologram had been. What I am about to tell you is classified at the highest level, she began. Most of you have never heard of it. Some of you have heard rumors, but dismissed them as myth. I am here to tell you that it is real. She took a deep breath. 250 years ago, humanity faced extinction, she continued. Not from the Concordat, not from any species we have met since joining the galactic community. We face something far worse. Something that the galaxy has tried very hard to forget. She activated her personal display unit, and new images filled the air around her, images of burning cities and dead worlds. Images of machines that moved like living things and consumed everything in their path. Images of humanity pushed to the very edge of annihilation. The harvesters, she said. That is what we called them. That is what they were. They came from beyond the galactic rim, and they fed on organic civilizations. They did not negotiate. They did not show mercy. They simply consumed. The delegates stared at the images in horrified silence. We stopped them, Vasquez continued. Humanity stopped them alone, without help from the Concordat or anyone else. And we did it by becoming something terrible. Something that we swore we would never become again. She let the images fade. Before I call for a vote on how to respond to the Lord's ultimatum, I need to tell you about Final Protocol, she said. I need to tell you what we buried. And I need to ask you if you are willing to dig it up. The vote took less than an hour. It was unanimous, far from Earth. Deep beneath the frozen surface of Jupiter's moon Europa, systems that had been dormant for 2 centuries began to stir. Automated maintenance drones that had waited in the darkness for generations received a signal they had been programmed to recognize. They began their work in orbit around about 12 human worlds. Secure facilities that had been disguised as asteroid mining stations or research outposts received the same signal. Doors that had not opened in living memory began to unlock and across all of human space. From the crowded stations of the inner colonies to the lonely outposts at the edge of explored territory, a single encrypted message propagated through every secure channel. It said simply, remember what we buried. Remember why, on Earth, Ambassador Vasquez stood alone at her window and watched the stars somewhere out there. A fleet was being assembled to crush humanity like an insect beneath a boot. Somewhere out there, beings who had ruled the galaxy for 600,000 years were confident that they understood exactly what humans were capable of. They were wrong. They had read humanity's history since first contact. They had studied human culture and human psychology. They had analyzed human military capabilities and human economic output, but they had not been there when the harvesters came. They had not seen what humanity became when survival required becoming monsters. They did not understand that Final Protocol was not a weapon, it was a memory, and sometimes memories were more dangerous than any weapon ever built. The year was 2089, and Earth was burning. Captain Marcus Webb crouched in the ruins of what had once been Singapore, watching the sky fill with shapes that should not exist. The harvesters had arrived 3 months ago, dropping out of space without warning, without communication, without anything that humanity could have prepared for. They were machines. But they were not like any machines humanity had ever built. They moved like liquid metal given purpose. They changed their shapes to suit their needs. And they consumed everything organic they encountered, not for fuel. The scientists had eventually realized, for data, the harvesters were collectors, and organic minds were their collection. Every human they captured was taken apart neuron. Their memories and thoughts and dreams extracted and stored in databanks that stretched across light years. 12 billion people had already died. Earth's population had been cut in half. And the machines showed no signs of stopping. Webb watched as another harvester unit descended from the clouds, its body shifting and reforming as it scanned for survivors. He had 17 soldiers left under his command, and they were armed with weapons that might as well have been pointed sticks for all the good they did. But they were still fighting. Humanity was still fighting. That was the thing about humans. Webb thought as he prepared to give the order to engage. They did not know how to stop across the planet. In a bunker buried deep beneath the Swiss Alps, a different kind of battle was being fought. Dr. Sarah Chun had not slept in 4 days, and she could feel her mind starting to fray at the edges. But sleep was a luxury that the dead could afford. And she was not dead yet. "Run the simulation again," she ordered. Her voice hoarse from too much coffee and too little hope, her team of exhausted scientists complied, their fingers moving across holographic interfaces with the desperate speed of people who knew they were running out of time. The simulation played out on the main display, showing waves of energy propagating through a network of artificial nodes. "It works," Dr. Chen said quietly. "In theory, it works." "In theory," her colleague Dr. Ahmed repeated, and there was something dark in his voice. "Do you understand what you are proposing?" Chun turned to face him, and her eyes were empty of everything except determination. "I am proposing that we survive," she said. The weapon they had designed was not a bomb in any conventional sense. It did not explode. It did not burn. It did not destroy matter. Instead, it weaponized something that humanity had only recently discovered they possessed: latent psionic potential. Every human mind, the research had shown, generated a tiny field of what could only be described as psychic energy. Individually, these fields were too weak to measure without specialized equipment, but collectively, focused and amplified through the right technology, they could become something devastating. The weapon worked by harvesting human suffering. It took the fear and pain and desperate will to survive that radiated from human minds under extreme stress, and it converted that energy into a pulse that could burn out machine intelligences. Across interstellar distances, the harvesters were networked, connected across light years through quantum entanglement. Strike one node with enough force, and the damage would cascade through the entire network. But the cost was enormous to generate enough power for the weapon. They would need to amplify human suffering to levels that would kill the subjects. They would need volunteers who understood that their deaths would be agonizing and prolonged. They would need to turn human beings into living batteries of pain. Dr. Chun looked at the simulation results and felt something inside her die. "How many?" she asked. Dr. Ahmed could not meet her eyes. 10,000, he said. "Minimum, to have any chance of affecting the global network. More if we want to be certain. 10,000 people." 10,000? Volunteers who would die screaming so that the rest of humanity might live. Chun closed her eyes. "Start looking for volunteers," she said. They found more than 10,000. They found 50,000 men and women, and even some teenagers who had lied about their ages. People who had lost everything to the harvesters and wanted their deaths to mean something. People who simply could not bear to watch their species die without fighting back. The facilities were built in secret, hidden from the harvesters and hidden from the rest of humanity, because Shun knew that if people understood what was being done in their name, many of them would refuse to be saved at such a price. The weapon was activated on September 15, 2089. The volunteers died over the course of 6 hours, their minds burning like candles in a hurricane as the amplifiers extracted every last fragment of psychic energy from their fading consciousness. And the harvesters fell across the globe, across the solar system, across light years of space. The machine intelligences simply stopped. Their networks burned out, their processors fried, their collective mind shattered by a wave of weaponized human anguish. Humanity had won, but the survivors could not celebrate. They had looked into the abyss and built weapons from what stared back. They had proven that there was no limit to what they would do to survive in the aftermath. The decision was made by those who knew the truth. The weapon designs were preserved but sealed. The facilities were dismantled and buried. The names of the 50,000 were recorded in a classified archive that only a handful of people would ever access, and an oath was sworn humanity would never use these weapons again. They would never become those monsters again, but they would never forget that they could. That was final protocol. Not a weapon, a memory. A reminder of what humanity was capable of when pushed beyond all limits. 250 years later, Admiral Chen Wei stood in a secure facility on Europa and read through the classified files that bore her ancestors. Her hands were trembling. They do not want us to use these, she whispered to the empty room. They want us to remember we are capable of this. That is the point. That has always been the point. She looked up at the dormant equipment that surrounded her. Machines that had not been activated since the day her great-grandmother had helped design them. The Galactic Lords thought they knew what humanity was. They had studied human culture and human history and human psychology. But they had not been there in 2089. They did not understand that the most dangerous thing about humanity was not their weapons or their anger or their refusal to know their place. The most dangerous thing about humanity was that they knew exactly what kind of monsters they could become, and they carried that knowledge with them like a scar that would never heal. Admiral Chen Wei closed the files and began to make preparations. Not for war, for something far more terrifying, for truth. The Concordat Armada assembled at the border of human space like a storm gathering on the horizon. 4,000 capital ships from 12 different species, each one carrying enough firepower to reduce a planet to rubble. Each one crewed by beings who had never known defeat in their long and ancient history's High Lord Kethvorin stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the human worlds on his tactical display with something approaching satisfaction. 28 cycles had passed since the ultimatum. Humanity had not surrendered. They had not fled. They had not even begun to mobilize their pitifully small fleet for a hopeless defensive action. Instead, they had done something that Kethvorin did not understand. They had gone quiet. Human communications had dropped to almost nothing. Human ships had retreated to their home systems. Human ambassadors had recalled themselves from every Concordat world. It was as if the entire species was holding its breath. They are afraid, Admiral Vethkara observed from her station. They know they cannot win. They are waiting for the end. Kethvorin was not so certain. He had studied humans for longer than most of his subordinates had been alive. And fear was not typically their response to hopeless situations. Humans did not surrender gracefully. They fought and struggled and clawed for every inch, even when victory was impossible. This silence felt wrong. It felt like the calm before something terrible. Begin the countdown to invasion, Kethvorin ordered, pushing his concerns aside. We will give them their 30 cycles, and then we will teach them the price of defiance. But the invasion never came on the 29th cycle. Humanity finally broke their silence, and they did so in a way that no one had anticipated. The broadcast began simultaneously on every frequency. Every channel, every communication network in the galaxy. It bypassed security protocols and encryption as if they did not exist. It appeared on view screens in Concordat, council chambers, and in the homes of ordinary citizens on 1,000 different worlds. Ambassador Yelena Vasquez appeared on the screen, her face calm and her voice steady. People of the galaxy, she began. My name is Yelena Vasquez, and I speak to you on behalf of humanity. We have been given an ultimatum by the Galactic Lords. Surrender our freedom or be destroyed. This is our response. The image shifted. Suddenly the screens were filled with fire and death. Cities burning under an alien sky. Bodies piled in streets that had become mass graves. Children screaming as machines descended from the clouds. 250 years ago, humanity faced extinction. Vasquez's voice continued over the images. We were attacked by an enemy that the galaxy has tried very hard to forget, the Harvesters. Machines from beyond the rim that consumed organic civilizations for their data. The images showed the harvesters in all their terrible glory. Liquid metal nightmares that shifted and reformed as they hunted their prey. The Galactic Lords knew about the harvesters, Vasquez said, and her voice had grown colder now. They had faced them before, 60,000 years ago, and they had run. They had hidden in the darkness and let 100 other species burn so that they might survive. New images appeared on the screens. Ancient records that have been buried in classified archives for millennia. Records that showed Concordat fleets retreating from harvester attacks. Records that showed the Lords abandoning their client species to die while they escaped to safety. We found these records, Vasquez continued, in the ruins of worlds that the Lords left behind. In the databases of species that the Lords allowed to be erased. We found the truth. The images shifted again. Now they showed humanity fighting back. Desperate battles in the streets of burning cities. Scientists working through the night in bunkers that shook with each harvester attack. Soldiers dying by the thousands to buy one more hour of survival. We did not run, Vasquez said. We could not run. We had nowhere to go. So we stayed and we fought, and we became something terrible. The next images were the hardest. To watch, they showed the facilities where the weapon had been built. They showed the volunteers walking into the amplifier chambers with full knowledge of what awaited them. They showed the faces of the 50,000 as they gave their lives in agony so that their species might survive. This is what we did, Vasquez said. And there was no pride in her voice, only grief. This is what we became. We turned human suffering into a weapon. We used the pain of our own people to strike back at the machines that were killing us. And we won. The screen showed the moment of victory. Harvesters falling silent across the globe. The machine network burning out in a cascade of psychic fire. The Galactic Lords fear us, Vasquez continued. And now you know why. Not because we are strong, not because we are aggressive, but because we have proven that there is no limit to what we will do to survive. We have proven that we can become monsters. The images faded, and Vasquez appeared again. Her eyes were wet with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. The Lords want you to fear us too, she said. They want you to believe that humanity is a threat that must be contained. That our final protocol is a weapon aimed at the galaxy. They are wrong. She took a deep breath. Final protocol is not a weapon, she said. It is a memory, a reminder of what we are capable of, and a warning about what happens when civilizations are pushed to the point of extinction. We preserved this knowledge not to use it, but to ensure that it would never be forgotten. That no one would ever have to face what we faced alone and unprepared. The broadcast shifted one final time. Now the screen showed something different. Schematics and scientific data and historical records. Information about the harvesters and how to fight them. Information about the weapons humanity had developed and how they worked. Information that the Galactic Lords had kept secret for 60,000 years. This is our gift to the galaxy, Vasquez said. Everything we know, everything we learned, everything we buried. We are sharing it all, every species, every world. Every civilization that has been kept ignorant and helpless by the Lords who claim to protect them. Her expression hardened. You want to know why the Lords really want to destroy us? She asked. It is not because we uplifted 3 primitive species. It is not because we breed too fast or think too dangerously. It is because we are proving that their control is built on lies and secrets. It is because we refuse to let them keep the galaxy in the dark. She leaned forward, her eyes burning with conviction. After today, you will never be helpless again, she said. After today, you will have the knowledge to defend yourselves against any threat, including the threat of those who would claim the right to rule you. That is our final protocol, not a weapon aimed at the galaxy, but a gift freely given. The broadcast ended, and across 1,000 worlds. Beings who had lived their entire lives under the shadow of the Galactic Lords began to remember what freedom felt like on the bridge of his flagship. I, Lord Kethvorin, watched the aftermath of the broadcast with growing horror. His communication. Officers were reporting chaos on every Concordat world client species were demanding answers about the Harvester Records miner. Races were downloading the weapons data and demanding independence. Even some of his own people were questioning whether the Lords had the right to keep such secrets. The invasion of human space was forgotten. A much larger crisis was unfolding. What have they done? Admiral Vethkara whispered. Kethvorin did not answer. He was beginning to understand that humanity had not been waiting in silence out of fear. They had been preparing something far more devastating than any weapon. They had been preparing to tell the truth. The Concordat was falling apart. 7 client species had declared rebellion within hours of the broadcast, their leaders citing the revealed records as proof that the Galactic Lords had forfeited any right to rule. 3 more species were demanding immediate independence negotiations, and on dozens of worlds, ordinary citizens were taking to the streets with a single question on their lips. What else have the Lords been hiding? High Lord Kethvorin stood in the emergency council chamber and watched his fellow Lords argue with the desperate fury of beings who felt their power slipping away. We must suppress the broadcast, Lord Crystalline insisted, their geometric form pulsing with agitation. We must declare it a fabrication, a human trick designed to destabilize the Concordat. The records they released are genuine, another Lord replied. A massive creature that resembled a sentient fungal colony. Our own historians have confirmed it. We cannot deny what is clearly true. Then we deny that it matters. Lord Crystalline shot back. The Harvester War was 60,000 years ago. What we did then has no bearing on what we are now. Tell that to the species whose ancestors we abandoned. The fungal Lord replied bitterly. Kethvorin listened to the arguments with growing impatience. They were missing the point. Damage from the broadcast could be contained eventually. Records could be reframed. Narratives could be adjusted. Given enough time, the Concordat could weather this storm as it had weathered others, but only if they acted decisively, only if they removed the source of the infection before it could spread any further. Humans must be destroyed, Kethvorin said, and his voice cut through the arguing Lords like a blade. Not conquered, not subjugated, destroyed. Every colony, every ship, every last trace of their civilization must be erased. The chamber fell silent. If we do that now, we can claim that the broadcast was their final act of aggression, Kethvorin continued. We can frame the destruction of humanity as a necessary response to an unprovoked attack on galactic stability. And without humans to contradict us, we can shape the narrative however we need to. The fleet is already assembled, Admiral Vethkara added from her position by the door. We can reach Sol System in 6 hours. Lord Crystalline's form pulsed with uncertainty. The other species will not accept such an action, they said. Not after what they have learned. They will accept it because they have no choice, Kethvorin replied. The client species depend on us for technology and protection. The minor races fear our power. By the time anyone can organize meaningful opposition, humanity will be gone, and we will have already established our version of events. The vote was called. It was not unanimous, but it was enough. The Concordat Armada received its orders 6 hours later. 4,000 warships dropped out of faster than light travel at the edge of the Sol. System Admiral Vethkara stood on the bridge of the lead vessel and surveyed the tactical display with professional satisfaction. Earth lay before them, a blue and green jewel suspended in the darkness. The human defense fleet was nowhere to be seen. They had probably fled, she thought, or hidden themselves among the asteroid belts and outer planets. Not that it mattered to Concordat. Ships carried enough firepower to sterilize the entire system. She was about to give the order to begin the bombardment when her sensor officer spoke up. "Admiral, we are detecting additional vessels." Vethkara frowned. "Human ships?" "Negative," the officer replied, and there was confusion in their voice. "The signatures do not match any human design. They do not match any Concordat design either. They are coming from multiple vectors. Hundreds of them." The tactical display updated, and Admiral Vethkara felt her blood run cold. Ships were emerging from hiding places throughout the system. Ships of designs she had never seen before. Some were small and swift, built for speed and agility. Others were massive and ungainly, clearly designed for cargo rather than combat. None of them were armed, but all of them were broadcasting. "They are hailing us," the communications officer reported. All of them simultaneously. The main view screen flickered to life, and suddenly the bridge was filled with faces, alien faces of species that Vethkara had only read about in classified reports. Client species who had supposedly been pacified generations ago. Minor races who were supposed to be too primitive to build starships even. A few individuals who wore the uniforms of Concordat worlds. Dissidents and rebels who had apparently found their way to human space. "We are the witnesses," a voice announced, speaking in the common galactic tongue. "We have come from 32 worlds to observe what happens here today." Admiral Vethkara found her voice. "You are interfering in a lawful Concordat military operation," she said. "Stand aside or be destroyed." "We carry no weapons," the voice replied calmly. "We pose no threat to your fleet. We are here only to watch and to record. We are broadcasting this moment to every world in the galaxy." The tactical display updated again. Now it showed communication beams spreading out from the witness ships, beams that carried live footage of the Concordat armada to billions of viewers across known space. "Go ahead," the voice continued. "Destroy Earth. Kill every human in this system. But know that the galaxy is watching. Know that every atrocity you commit will be recorded and preserved forever. Know that you will never be able to bury the truth again." Admiral Vethkara stared at the view screen in disbelief. This was not supposed to happen. Humanity was supposed to be alone. They were supposed to be friendless and afraid. Instead, they had somehow gathered a fleet of witnesses from across the galaxy. Beings who had traveled here specifically to ensure that whatever happened would be seen and remembered. New face appeared on the view screen. Admiral Chen Wei of the United Terran Fleet. "High Lord Kethvorin," she said, addressing the Lord directly, even though he was light minutes away on another ship. "You wanted to make an example of us. You wanted to show the galaxy what happens to species that defy the Concordat. Well, here is your chance." She spread her hands. "We will not stop you," she said. "We have no weapons capable of challenging your fleet. We have no secret superweapon that will save us at the last moment. All we have is the truth and the willingness to die for it." Her expression was calm, almost peaceful. "So make your choice," she continued. "Destroy us and prove to the galaxy that the galactic lords rule through fear and murder. Or stand down and admit that your power has limits. Either way, the universe will know what you really are." The Concordat fleet hung motionless in space. 4,000 warships, each one crewed by beings who had been raised to believe in the rightness of their cause. Each one pointing its weapons at a world that refused to fight back on the bridge of his flagship. High Lord Kethvorin stared at the view screen and felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Uncertainty. He had expected defiance. He had expected desperate resistance. He had not expected to be offered a choice, and he had not expected the choice to be so simple or so terrible. "Give the order," Admiral Vethkara said from the lead ship. We can still win this. But even as she spoke, something was changing in the fleet. The ships from the Dominion remained steady, their crews loyal to HFY, but the ships from other Concordat species were beginning to waver on a dozen bridges. Captains and admirals were watching the same broadcast that the rest of the galaxy was watching. They were seeing the witness ships and the unarmed human vessels, and the quiet determination of people who had chosen to die rather than compromise their principles, and they were remembering their own histories. The species they had conquered, the worlds they had stripped of resources, the lies they had told themselves to justify it all ships. Target Earth and fire on my command. Admiral Vethkara ordered silence. All ships. Acknowledge. She repeated more silence, and then a voice spoke on the open channel. My grandmother's world was burned by the harvesters. The voice said, the Vethkai, they were called a minor species in the Outer Rim. The Lords abandoned them when the machines came, told them they were not worth saving. One ship escaped, carrying a handful of survivors. My grandmother was a child on that ship. The voice belonged to a Dominion captain, one of HFY's own people. Humanity remembers them, the captain continued. They found records of my grandmother's people in the ruins of a harvester world. They preserved the names and the stories and the memories of a species that the Lords wanted to forget. They remember the Vethkai. His voice cracked with emotion. The Lords never even recorded their name. One by one, ships began to stand down, first the vessels from the minor species, then the client race contingents. Then even some of the core Concordat fleets. Admiral Vethkara watched her invasion force crumble around her. High Lord, she said, her voice barely a whisper. What are your orders? HFY did not respond. He was staring at the view screen, at the image of Earth hanging in the void, at the witness ships that surrounded it like a protective constellation. He had ruled the Dominion for 3,000 years. He had conquered worlds and crushed rebellions and built an empire that spanned a quarter of the galaxy, and now he was being defeated by a species that had offered him nothing but truth and the freedom to choose. Stand down, he said finally, and the words tasted like ash in his mouth. All ships, stand down and withdraw to Concordat space. The order propagated through the fleet, and slowly, reluctantly, 4,000 warships turned away from Earth and began the long journey home. Humanity had not fired a single shot. They had simply shown the galaxy a mirror, and the Galactic Lords had not liked what they saw. 3 months had passed. Since the standoff at Sol, the galaxy had changed. More in those 90 days than it had in the previous 10,000 years. The Galactic Concordat was fracturing along lines that had been invisible for millennia, and species that had lived under the Lords' shadow for generations were finally stepping into the light. Ambassador Yellen Vasquez walked through the corridors of Orbital Station 7, humanity's largest space station, and marveled at how different it felt 3 months ago. These corridors had been filled only with humans. Now she passed beings of a dozen different species, former clients and minor races and refugees from Concordat worlds who had come seeking something they had almost forgotten how to name freedom. The station had become a symbol, a gathering place for everyone who wanted to build something new, and today it would become something more. Vasquez entered the main assembly chamber and took her place at the central podium. Before her sat representatives from 200 different species. Some were ancient races that had been client species of the Lords for longer than humanity had existed. Others were young civilizations that had only recently developed space travel. Some had traveled for weeks to be here. Others had simply appeared, materializing out of the darkness of space with no explanation of where they had come from. All of them had come for the same reason. Thank you all for being here, Vasquez began. her voice carrying through the vast chamber. "I know that many of you have risked everything to attend this gathering. I know that the lords consider your presence here an act of treason. I want you to know that humanity sees it as an act of courage." Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the assembled delegates. 3 months ago, we shared everything we knew about the harvesters with the galaxy, Vasquez continued. We did it because we believed that knowledge should be free, that no species should be kept ignorant and helpless by those who claim the right to rule them. That belief has not changed. She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But I want to be clear about something," she said. "Humanity is not here to replace the Galactic Lords. We are not here to build a new empire on the ruins of the old one. We did not fight for our freedom just to take freedom from others." The chamber fell silent. "We have been asked by many of you to lead this new coalition," Vasquez said, "to become the center of a new galactic order that would challenge the Concordat. We are refusing that request." Surprised murmurs filled the chamber. "Instead, we are proposing something different," Vasquez continued. "Something that has never been tried before in the history of this galaxy. We are calling it the Remembrance Compact." She activated the holographic display, and the chamber filled with images and diagrams. "The compact is simple," she explained. "Every species that joins agrees to one thing. They will share their history. All of it, the triumphs and the atrocities, the moments of glory and the moments of shame. Nothing will be hidden. Nothing will be buried. Everything will be remembered." The display showed examples, records from the Harvester War, including the terrible weapons humanity had built, records from the Concordat archives, showing the Lord's abandoned allies and suppressed rebellions, records from a dozen other species, each one revealing secrets that had been kept for generations. "This is not about punishment," Vasquez said. "This is not about revenge. This is about accountability. It is about ensuring that we learn from the past instead of repeating it." She looked out at the assembled delegates. "The Galactic Lords ruled through secrets and lies," she said. "They kept the galaxy in the dark because darkness made control easier. We are proposing a different way. We are proposing a galaxy where nothing is hidden, where every species knows exactly what every other species has done, where we face our monsters in the open instead of letting them grow in the shadows." A delegate from one of the former client species raised a manipulator limb. "What happens to the Lords under this system?" they asked. "They are offered the same choice as everyone else," Vasquez replied. "Join the compact as equals, with their own sins exposed alongside everyone else's, or refuse and watch as their power crumbles around them. And if they refuse, then they fade into irrelevance," Vasquez said simply. "The galaxy is waking up. Species that were kept primitive are learning to build starships. Species that were kept ignorant are learning the truth. The Lords can either adapt to this new reality or be left behind by it. We will not force them either way." The debate that followed lasted for 3 days in the end. The vote was nearly unanimous. The Remembrance Compact was ratified by 178 species, with only a handful abstaining of the 5 Galactic Lords. 3 eventually agreed to join. High Lord Kethvorn of the Dominion was among them, though the decision had cost him half his supporters and nearly caused a civil war among his people. The other 2 lords refused and retreated to their home systems, their empires collapsing around them as client species and minor races walked away one by one. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had changed with it. 6 months after the ratification of the compact, Ambassador Vasquez stood before the first full meeting of the new Galactic Assembly. 200 species sat before her, many meeting as equals for the first time in their histories. Former masters sat beside former slaves. Ancient races sat beside civilizations that had only learned of the wider galaxy a few years ago. Enemies sat beside enemies, united by something stronger than old grudges. We were asked once what makes humanity dangerous, Vasquez said, her voice carrying through the vast chamber. High Lord Kethvorn himself asked us that question. And at the time, I did not have a good answer. She paused, looking out at the gathered representatives. Now I do, she said. What makes humanity dangerous is not our weapons. It is not our anger. It is not our refusal to know our place. What makes humanity dangerous is that we refuse to forget. Her voice grew stronger. We drag our monsters into the light, and we make them useful, she said. We turn our worst days into warnings. We turn our greatest sins into lessons. We carry the weight of what we have done, and we use it to become better. She spread her hands, encompassing the entire assembly. That is our final protocol, she said. Not a threat, not a weapon, but a promise. We will remember all of it, forever. And we will make sure that you can too. The assembly hall erupted in applause, and far from the celebration, on a quiet human colony world in the Outer Rim, an old woman named Sarah was teaching a class. Her students came from 12 different species, children and young beings, who had been brought together by the new networks of exchange that the Compact had created. They were learning about the Harvester War, about the Concordat's hidden history, about what sapient beings were capable of, both terrible and beautiful. One of the students, a young Cathari with iridescent scales, raised their hand. Teacher Sarah, they said, why do we have to learn the sad parts? Sarah smiled. She was 97 years old, and she had seen humanity go from the edge of extinction to the center of a galactic transformation. She had seen miracles and horrors and everything in between, and she had learned, over all those years, that the two were often closer together than anyone wanted to admit, because the sad parts are how we know we can do better, she said gently. When we remember the mistakes, we can avoid making them again. When we remember the pain, we can work to prevent it. When we remember the monsters, we can make sure they stay in the past where they belong. The young Cathari considered this. So remembering is like a shield? They asked. Sarah nodded. The strongest shield there is, she said, because it protects us not from others but from ourselves, from the worst parts of what we could become. She looked around at her students, at the dozen different faces from a dozen different worlds, all of them looking up at her with the innocent curiosity of youth. That is what humanity gave to the galaxy, she said. Not weapons, not power, not even knowledge. We gave you the courage to remember. Outside the classroom window, the sun was setting. Its light painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. And Sarah watched her students gather their things and say their goodbyes. Tomorrow they would learn about the rebuilding years, about the first tentative steps toward the remembrance compact. Next week, they would learn about the species that had been lost, the civilizations that would never be rebuilt, the names that survived only because someone had thought to write them down. It was heavy knowledge for young minds, but Sarah had learned long ago that young minds were stronger than anyone gave them credit for, and besides, they would not carry this weight alone. That was the whole point. The galaxy was learning to remember together and together. They would make sure that the monsters of the past stayed buried, not through silence, not through secrets, but through the simple, powerful act of refusing to forget. The sun dipped below the horizon, and somewhere in the gathering darkness, a new day was being born.